everyone. I'm Izzy. I'm a member of St George's. I'm married to Ewan, who volunteers as the Environment Officer for St George's alongside his day job, which is as an engineer. My day job is as a social worker in adult social care. And just thanks again for coming today. I really think this is such an important topic to discuss the emotions related to climate change, because there are really big emotions when we face the true scale of the climate emergency, and if we don't address those emotions, there's a risk that we can become overwhelmed with despair or anxiety, and that can make us feel quite helpless and can really quite hinder our actions on climate change. Or on the other hand, sometimes we can tend to bury our head in the sand to try and avoid feeling those emotions in the first place. And I think that's actually one of the key reasons why, as humanity, we've not acted sooner and with more urgency on climate change is actually the psychology of it. And so I think it's really important to discuss. I would say I'm not an expert on the topic, but I have drawn together resources to get us thinking about. We're going to have some time for discussion, to share ideas and thoughts and experiences. And I would say, even if you've not thought about this topic before, I think you'll find, when we get into the topic, that we all have relevant experiences to bring to it. So I hope this will be helpful wherever you're at. Just to add, the slides and the video of the session will go up on the St George's website. I've put the link on here. So you can refer back to things and pass on to anyone who's not been able to come. So it will be me for most of the session with some breakout rooms, but then later on we've got an opportunity to choose a subject that you want to go into in a little bit more detail, and one of those will be led by John Swales. Joanna's leading a discussion and I'm leading one. So just to start with, I just wanted to share some examples of emotions related to climate change. So whilst I was preparing this talk and looking for examples of emotions related to climate change, this happened. Leeds City Council and a planning committee approved the expansion of Leeds Bradford Airport. The government can still potentially overrule the decision. However, this was devastating news for many people who had worked tirelessly to oppose the expansion. Most of the campaigners are involved due to the climate change concerns, because the planned expansion would make it impossible to meet Leeds City Council's goal to become a net zero carbon emissions city by 2030, because passenger numbers will double, meaning that from 2026, the carbon emissions related to the airport alone will exceed the carbon budget for the whole of the city of Leeds, due clearly to the flights mostly. On the day of the planning meeting, I was part of a WhatsApp group of more than 100 supporters of Galba, the Group for Action on Leeds Bradford Airport, which is the group which has coordinated the campaign against expansion. Many of the people in the group were watching the whole 8-hour meeting live and making comments on the group. I didn't put myself through that personally, but following the comments was a bit like watching a football commentary. And I noticed the emotions expressed on the WhatsApp group as the results came in. This is some of the comments that were made. And I know we can all tend to make some of these kind of comments lightheartedly about something that's happened in a sports match, or in relation to something that's happened on our favourite TV programme. But I think these were very heartfelt. And one that really hit me was someone who said, "The powerlessness I feel has just left me in tears tucking my 6-year-old in. I don't want to be in this world tonight." The next day, I put a message on the group asking if it'd be okay to use some of the comments in an anonymised form for this session. And I was surprised 5 minutes later to get a WhatsApp call from a complete stranger who was in tears, who's a lady who's on the committee of Galba and is a meteorologist by background. And she told me that she'd barely stopped crying all morning because they'd worked so hard to oppose the expansion due to the climate change impacts, and she was heartbroken. I spoke to her for a few minutes, tried to listen to her and comfort her. I'm not sure I did the best job. And research has shown that professionals working within climate science and activists often experience burnout, anxiety, grief, and depression, with some choosing to leave the area of research. I've heard them described as like the canaries in the mine. They're experiencing the emotions first, which many of us in the general public are now feeling. As I said, the government can still overrule the decision. Galba continues their campaign and is asking the Secretary of State to call in the decision for a public inquiry. Here's some of the other comments on the group showing the resilience and the strength to keep going in the fight. Do look at their website if you want to see how you can support the campaign. One of the actions I think they're still asking for is to ask people to write to the Secretary of State to ask him to call in the decision for public inquiry, which has recently happened with the Cumbria coal mine. Then there's also the grief of people who are witnessing the effects of climate change on places and things they love. This is a great article from The Guardian from February 2020, which was written in the wake of the Australian bushfires. And if Joanna's managed to lay her hands on the quote, I'm just going to ask her to read out a quote from the article.
Yeah. Over the past few weeks, Clover Hogan has found herself crying during the day and waking up at night gripped by panic. The 20-year-old, who now lives in London, grew up in Queensland, Australia, cheek by jowl with the country's wildlife, fishing frogs out of the toilet and dodging snakes hanging from the ceiling. The bushfires ravaging her homeland over the past few weeks have taken their toll. I found myself bursting into tears, just seeing the absolutely harrowing images of what's happening in Australia. It's overwhelming and terrifying. Hogan said her lowest point came when she heard about the death of 500 million animals incinerated as the fires swept through the bush. That was the moment where I felt my heart cleave into two pieces. I felt absolutely distraught.
Thanks, Joanna. Then we have the concerns of children and young people concerned for their futures. In March 2020, the BBC did a survey of children and young people aged 8 to 16 and showed that 3/4 were worried about the state of the planet. 1 in 5 had had a bad dream about climate change, and 41% didn't trust adults to tackle the challenges presented by climate change. I'm sure some of you are parents, grandparents, or work with children and young people and might be having some of these conversations and coming across these concerns. So why talk about emotions and climate change? I touched on it earlier, but I've identified 2 reasons. Firstly, we need to be able to look after ourselves and each other. With these big, often difficult emotions. Some of us might not be feeling the emotions yet, or others might be feeling them but not talking about it because, maybe we think it seems a bit odd, or, it seems negative, or we don't want to bring other people down. I know that's how I felt several years ago before it was so commonly discussed really publicly. So we need to be able to open up these conversations and support each other. And secondly, to actually equip our climate action, because emotions can be a really powerful tool to fuel our actions on the issues that we're concerned about. But as I said earlier, if we don't address them adequately, there's a risk that our grief and concern, which is natural for the state of the planet, can turn to despair and anxiety and can actually hinder our actions. Or that we might be scared of feeling the emotions in the first place and deny the problem, minimize, blame others, expect other people to do things, generally bury our heads in the sand. So we're going to talk now about how to look after ourselves and each other. So the first point. And to do this, we're going to go into breakout rooms to discuss ideas of, how can we look after ourselves and each other in the light of climate distress. And that might be something you've thought about a lot, or it might be something that you've not thought about before. But that's fine. If you've not thought about the topic before, maybe just think about, we've all, I'm sure, been through difficult experiences in life, whether that's workplace stress or bereavement, or supported other people through those situations. So there's a lot of things we can pull out of other things we've been through in life and what worked in those situations that we can also, I think, apply to climate related distress. So think about, in general, how to look after our well-being and other people's well-being, and apply that to climate distress. So we're going to have a breakout discussion for about 10 minutes. Okay, so I'll just move on to, I had a thought. This is my thoughts, and you'll see that a lot of them is what people have already said. So involve yourselves in action. That's a couple of people have said that. I certainly find that, the most helpful thing. But also, know your limitations. I think that was touched on as well, in terms of we can't save the world on our own, and I think we have to kind of do what we can do, but also be able to accept the things that we can't do, and that we can't do everything. I've added this one since Tuesday from some comments that came up on Tuesday. I've just added, don't sweat the small stuff. Like, sometimes we have to be able to, especially I think in terms of our own personal, trying to reduce our own personal carbon footprint. It's not getting too worried about, I don't know, some small item of plastic packaging that we've not been able to avoid or recycle or something, and getting that in the wider context of the things that make a big impact in our own lives, and trying to act on those, but also in terms of activism, like John was saying, and trying to get politicians and businesses and so on doing the really big things as well. Also rest, that was touched on by Roz, I think. Sabbath is a biblical principle. I certainly find that if I'm doing like climate stuff in the evening, like letter writing, campaigning, going to meetings, I need to do something different before I go to bed. Otherwise, I'm not going to sleep very well. And I need longer periods of doing different things and things that I enjoy. Often for me, that's going out for a walk or spending time outdoors. And I'm sure that's the same for many people. And there's a lot of research about the benefits of spending time outdoors as well. And doing things you enjoy, whatever that might be, as long as it's not like burning down forests or something, you'd probably be all right. Ewan's laughing at me. Exercise, there's a lot of research about the benefits of exercise on well-being and mental health, and talking to others, again, as we said, just talking things through often helps us to kind of cope with things. I'm not going through these in order. Sorry. Limit your access to bad news. I think that's an important one, and I think it's important to acknowledge that it's not necessarily the same as burying our heads in the sand. I think once we've got the information about the climate crisis, the impacts and the scale of the problem, we probably don't need to keep in touch with every little development, not little development, but every development, and how much polar ice cap has melted in the last month or so on, unless you've got something that you can do with that information. It may just be overwhelming, and it might not help to know that unless you've got something you can do with the information. So in my mind, it's maybe better to use that time and that headspace for taking action, but keeping generally up to date. And prayer, worship, reading the Bible, so on. It's obvious, kind of Sunday school stuff, isn't it? But obviously focusing on the gospel is gonna help us through. And I've included lament in there, is a very biblical form of prayer in very difficult circumstances. And John's going to be leading an optional breakout room later, leading some lament. Also, validate, don't minimize. That's something I picked up about supporting other people with climate grief. Is it's important not to try and comfort people with sort of, oh, don't worry, I'm sure everything will be fine, because we have to be able to face up to the truth, which is that not everything will be fine with the climate. Many of the effects are already with us, and the person you're trying to help will probably see through that false reassurance anyway, so it's not going to be comforting to them. But we can validate, we can say, yes, it's okay to feel worried and scared, but then help the person to engage with some of these other kind of coping ways of looking after ourselves, which we're discussing. I had a few more. I just found these things online about these online groups and courses, so I can't make a personal recommendation of any of them. But it's interesting if you wanted to look up any of these. So the Good Grief Network is an American organization that's leading courses of sort of working through climate grief and turning that into positive action. I think they you can log it, it's online, so you can log in from across the world. And Deep Waters, this is a Christian organization. Green Christian is leading a course that they've called Deep Waters, which I think the course started in January, and so we've kind of missed this one, but I think you can sign up if you're interested in the next one. It's the only Christian one out of these three. And the third one is the Climate Psychology organization. They run online climate cafes where you can go and just talk to other people about how you're feeling about the climate. They also do, well, it says on the website, they do like one-to-one support sessions with therapists as well, specifically talking, if you want to specifically talk about climate distress. As I say, it's not a personal recommendation. I haven't had any contact with them other than seeing the website. It did look like in the information about us on the website, there was some slightly new agey things in there, but looking at the list of people involved in it, there seems to be a lot of like well qualified psychologists and academics and therapists involved. So so it might be worth looking up if you're interested. And then it's do seek professional help if needed. Many of us maybe may have mental health conditions that alongside climate distress, and the climate change situation may exacerbate underlying mental health problems, or may trigger a mental health condition or episode. So it's worth bearing that in mind. In that line, I just thought I'd put up here some of the common symptoms of depression, so that we can be aware if we or people we know may be experiencing depression, or kind of heading towards it, I suppose. There are various different versions of diagnostic tests, but they do tend to center around a persistent experience of a combination of several of these symptoms. It's not an exhaustive list, but you also don't have to tick every box for a diagnosis. So I'll just let you just have a look at that. But a couple of things to pick out that sort of maybe a sign of of depression, rather than kind of just climate distress, as it were. Maybe the diminished interest or pleasure, so lack of ability to feel pleasure in the things we usually enjoy. Also the loss of self-esteem, feelings of worthlessness, personal failure. That might be a sign of depression. Well, any of these could be, but I think there's a couple of ones to particularly be aware of. So if this is you or someone that do seek professional help and help from trusted friends and family. Similarly, I just thought I'd share this. I got this from the Mind website, which is just about when does anxiety, which is a natural response to uncertain and difficult circumstances, when is that a mental health problem? I'll just let you have a look at that. So again, seek professional help if that's looking kind of familiar. It might be a case of, for some people, medication might be useful, so contacting your GP. Some people might benefit from like talking therapies. There is the Leeds Mental Wellbeing Service. They do one-to-one support and groups for people with kind of common mental health problems like depression and anxiety. You can self-refer online for that. That's the Leeds Mental Wellbeing Service. Or you may want to use a Christian counsellor, or paid counselling. So I just think that's all worth knowing about. Someone's put their hand up. If you've got maybe just hi.
I have. Sorry, am I interrupting? Or
no, go for it.
I was just going to say that it's worth recognizing that sometimes our stress, because of the COVID situation, our stress level is higher. Our threshold, if you like, is higher. And I certainly find that things that normally I would just kind of shrug off or deal with are upsetting me more than normal. So I think that's useful to perhaps understand and put your down days perhaps into a bit more perspective.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, thank you very much. And I've been a bit conscious about doing some of these sessions during the pandemic for that reason, but also I didn't want to delay, but that's a really important point. Thank you. So we're just going to move on now to the second point of why I talk about emotions, which is equipping our climate action. Our emotions are deeply related to our actions. I think most of us are aware that as humans, we don't just make decisions based on logic and rational analysis. We make them as well based on how we feel about things. So just giving someone the facts about climate change doesn't necessarily always lead to them taking the actions we might want them to take. It's how they feel about it will affect what they do with the information, either positively or negatively. And that goes for ourselves. It also goes for our friends and family, politicians, business leaders, and so on that we might be speaking to about climate change. And this diagram is about the theory called head, heart, and hands, which I think is a very instinctive and useful theory, which applies to any kind of change that we might want to take in life, or we might want others to take, or something we want to take people to take action on, which basically just says that if we want people to take action on something, we need to involve the head, heart, and the hands. So our emotions can fuel our climate action, whether those emotions are grief, anger, hope. None of these are invalid emotions. Just focusing on grief, grief's a natural response to loss. If someone's been through a bereavement, we'd say it's healthy for them to grieve. So I think it's also a very valid response to the losses of climate change, the losses that we're experiencing already and expecting further to the planet and the people, humanity. And so our grief can help fuel our bold and urgent actions. So I think when we speak about climate change, we do need to engage the emotions, tell stories, and also listen to the concerns and the emotions of people who are feeling the effect of climate change. So we're just going to touch very briefly on a few stories just now. So this is Obisa, who is a subsistence farmer in Ethiopia. So pictures from Tier Fund. And she says, in the past, we had rainfall every 4 to 5 months. but now we don't know when the rainfall will come. I worry about my children and my family. I feel worried whenever I think about the future. And Obisa spends many hours every day walking to fetch water, but is still struggling to provide for her children. And this is Soraya's story from Bangladesh. I'll just let you read that yourselves. Then there are people in the UK who are directly experiencing the effects due to increased severity of flooding. Whether people really realise or understand that there's a link to climate change or not. I'm just going to watch this video. I just need to skip to the right place, which is a church leader from Kendal speaking about the impact of flooding in Kendal. So yeah, I think that's something we need to be thinking about as well, as to how to support each other as extreme weather events are going to affect more of us in the coming years as well. Where am I at now? Yeah, so but I just also wanted to say that grief is not the same as despair, or indeed depression, as we covered earlier. So despair tells us that there's no hope, whereas as Christians, I think we can always say that despair is not the truth. There is always hope because the tomb is empty. Jesus lived and died and rose again to reconcile the whole world to himself, not just us as individuals. And despair prevents us taking action and can suck life out of us. So again, if you find yourself in that place, reach out to other people for support and think about some of the self-care tips that we discussed earlier. And similarly, a healthy level of concern for the future of our planet and the experiences of our global brothers and sisters is a reasonable and healthy response, but anxiety can be crippling, and the Bible repeatedly tells us, do not be afraid. So if you find yourself in that place, seek help and support. But there is a danger that we're so worried about feeling these negative emotions that we put barriers up to prevent ourselves engaging emotionally with the issue, because we're worried about feeling overwhelmed and distressed. So we ensure that the knowledge stays in the head and doesn't make it to the heart, which is a barrier to our actions. So if we don't address our grief and anxiety about climate change, then most of us probably will tend to resort to these psychological defense mechanisms: denial, minimization of the problem, blaming others, or we can successfully hold cognitive dissonance of holding two completely contrary opinions at the same time. One example I heard was of a climate scientist who spent their professional life warning of the dangers of climate change and their private life flying off regularly around the world on skiing holidays. This is about 10 years ago. It may not be the case now. They may have moved on, and I think it's less socially acceptable than it was. But there's also the issue of belief perseverance, which is the tendency to maintain a belief despite evidence that contradicts it. And such beliefs might actually be strengthened when other people present evidence to contradict them. We all know about conspiracy theories about COVID, for example. That's an extreme example, as is out and out climate science denial. But it's worth not considering ourselves immune to some level of any of these psychological defense mechanisms. I know there's times over the years when I've buried my head in the sand about the climate. And I think this is one of the key reasons why humanity has not acted sooner on climate change more comprehensively. And our brains, one thing is our brains are wired to deal with short-term risks, not so much long-term risks. If you're interested in the psychology of climate change, I would suggest checking out George Marshall. This is one of his books, which I haven't read, but I've read one of his older books and his website, and some YouTube talks on YouTube that I'd recommend, and he addresses the question of, for example, why climate change is such a conversation killer, something that we tend to maintain a polite silence about in polite conversation. And he talks about the fact that when most people in the UK are specifically asked in surveys if they're concerned about climate change, most people express that they're very concerned. However, if you go out onto the streets and ask people an open question what they're concerned about, very few people mention climate change. Again, hopefully, I feel like this is changing, and just in the last year or two. But I think that a lot of that still persists. Now, what time are we at? So yeah, he also talks about climate change in the language of belief. So he talks about how you can know the information about climate change but not really believe it, and there can be a fundamental disconnect between what we know and what we do about climate change. And in one of his books, which I have read, which is this one, Carbon Detox, which I recommend, though it's a bit outdated in some of the sort of carbon footprint stuff, but it's good on climate change psychology. He talks about how he had a sort of conversion experience of suddenly believing in climate change, but this was 18 years after he first heard about climate change and 5 years after he'd been working on climate change full time. So we're running slightly out of time, so I'm just going to cut a little bit. So yeah, do look him up. I think his stuff's very useful. So we are going to just go into another short breakout room in the same groups you were in before, just to reflect. I put some questions on there, but then they're not essential. Is that everyone back, Ewan? Okay, so we're going to do something a bit different now. So the other breakout rooms we've done has been more discussion based. This time we're going to have an option to use the breakout rooms as a way to choose a topic that you want to explore a bit further. So we're going to have 3 options. These are the options. So firstly, John Swale is going to be leading some lament. John, do you want to just say something about what you're doing?
Yep, so exploring and, well, actually lamenting together, an opportunity to discuss it. I believe that lament is a gem of it should be part of our spirituality, particularly as we face climate breakdown. So I'll be leading us in one with hopefully an opportunity to discuss it.
Thank you. I'm going to be leading some content that I've called Wielding the Axe of Hope, subtitled Outrage and Optimism, which I will introduce you to where I've stolen both of those 2 phrases from. And then Joanna's going to be leading some discussion. Do you want to just say what you're doing, Joanna?
Yeah, just a chance really. It may be that you've come along this afternoon and you would just value that ability to have space to share. It might be that there's a conversation or an emotion that you feel at the moment you haven't had chance to do that, and so we'll just take some time to listen to one another and then to pray for one another.
So I wanted to look at the question of is there any room for optimism on climate change? Depending on your personality and your outlook, you might be nodding along to the question and asking yourself, yeah, is there any room for optimism? Or you might think I'm a raging pessimist for even asking the question. I was interested in seeing Tim and Maggie when you came up, because you had Eeyore and Tigger on your picture. Was that, have you got an optimist and a pessimist there? Or is it just you like them? Yeah. Well, in our household, Ewan's the optimist in terms of the climate. He'd probably want to talk about the acceleration of renewable technologies and how many new huge wind farms have been built recently. I'm more of a pessimist. I'd probably tell you, how much of the rainforest has been chopped down recently, or how many coal-fired power stations are still being built in different countries. But I wanted to explore how do we balance out our natural inclinations towards one side or the other, and is there a right way to view things? How can we be realists in the world facing the climate crisis? To address this question, I'd like to introduce you to one of my new heroes. Does anyone know who this is? Not Prince Charles, the lady on the left. Just to make you feel better, nobody knew on Tuesday.
Christine Figueres.
Oh, well done. Yes, who was that? Maggie?
Sylvia.
Oh, hi. So yes, this is my new climate hero, Cristina Figueres, who is a Costa Rican diplomat who was given the very difficult job of heading up the UN Climate Summit in 2015 in Paris, COP21. The COP meetings are regular meetings of all the countries of the UN, which is pretty much the whole world, coming together to discuss how to tackle climate change. And the Paris Summit, the summit before the Paris Summit was the Copenhagen Summit, which great hopes have been pinned on Copenhagen being the time that the world would come to an agreement on climate change, and there'd been a lot of activism and work gone into that. However, unfortunately, it was a complete flop and completely failed to reach an agreement, to the disappointment of many, many thousands of people. So Christiana had a difficult task on her hands when she was given the job of leading the next summit in Paris. But as anyone, if you know a little bit about climate change, you probably know that Paris was actually a very big moment in climate action. It turned out very differently. All the countries of the UN, I think it's 195-ish, voted unanimously on a historic global agreement with binding targets for all countries on climate change. And Christiana would be the first to tell you that the job is by no means done, but it was a big step forward, and the Paris Agreement remains one of the key things that we can use to hold governments to account worldwide. Anyway, back to outrage and optimism. So we're going to listen to Christiana talking about the process of the Paris Summit on the first episode of a podcast called Outrage and Optimism. That's where I stole that phrase from. I would highly, highly recommend this podcast. I find it so encouraging. And this is from the first episode when they're talking about the name of the podcast. So this is Christiana and another couple of guys who are involved in the Paris Summit. Settle in, we're going to listen to it for a few minutes. I'm just going to stop that there, but conscious that I'm cutting off so much good stuff because it's just, it goes on to discuss about correlation with the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King and other colleagues, and how outrage and optimism both played into that. And there's so much good stuff in there. There's a link here, and then it goes on to this episode goes on to an interview with David Attenborough. So there's a link there to the podcast, or you can get it on any kind of podcast platform. I would just heartily recommend it. And I also I got this quote from Greta Thunberg, which is she's talking about hope, but I think she's sort of talking about the same thing, and it's talking about a kind of hope or optimism, which is not the same as wishful thinking or optimism bias. It's something that takes full account of the odds stacked against us, but chooses to believe that we can make change happen. I'll read the quote out just in case other people are struggling to see the screen. So this is from Greta Thunberg's book, No One is Too Small to Make a Difference. Saying everything will be all right while continuing doing nothing at all is just not hopeful to us. In fact, it's the opposite of hope. You can't just sit around waiting for hope to come. Hope is something you have to earn. So it's about an active optimism or hope. And another author I read described hope as an axe to break down doors with in an emergency. That's the other place I stole the phrase from, the axe of hope. So that's really all I'd prepared, but we've got a few minutes left. We can just have a bit of a discussion.
So the idea is I'll offer just a few minutes of intro. Then I'll put some prayers on the screen, which I'll lead us through as a type of lament. And then we'll have an opportunity just to reflect on anything we like, but also is this lament, is it actually helpful? I think there's a resource here, a way of praying, which is good for individuals, and it's good for the good for the church. So just a little bit of intro for myself. A couple of years ago, our daughter Rebecca went on a youth climate strike, and if you'd asked me before that, do you care about the climate? I'd say, well, yes, absolutely. I found out about it at school, and we need to do something about it. If you'd asked me more details, I'd have been a bit hazy. But when my daughter went on the youth climate strike, I started to look a bit more seriously at the science of some IPCC report and stuff coming out, and was just overwhelmed with really what a terrible situation we are in. We face a future without serious changes in which there will be mass starvation, mass migration, and societal collapse. And it was extremely sort of sobering. Physically, it affected me. We had holidays booked in various caravans and whatever, didn't we? And I was just ill with a chest infection, couldn't sleep at night. And what would I do to sort of, as I'm awake, I'd listen to more podcasts or read more reports about the science. Wasn't the best move, to be perfectly honest. But a couple of things sort of helped me out of that period. One was drawing on my own sort of work in the Old Testament, where I've done some teaching on lament. So using lament as a vehicle for my grief, which we might say is like PTSD that was mentioned, but in a sense, pre-traumatic stress disorder, and on a global and national level. So using lament, and then also being involved in activism. But I'm going to focus on the lament here. See, God's people in the past have faced many catastrophes, and the prophets and the psalmists used a lament as a language of prayer, because it's a type of spirituality which recognizes the pain, the grief, and the questions that we may have. For instance, the Book of Lamentations offers a prayerful response to the fall of Jerusalem, and the Book of Joel calls the people of God to repent and lament in the face of a crop destroying plague of locusts. So in the next few moments, we're going to be following a structured and sustained lament, which may articulate what we are feeling. It provides a way of praying which seeks to bring our pain and our questions to the healer of all hurts and to the God of all comfort. It's a cry to God that he would avert the coming disaster. But our lament also seeks to speak to ourselves as a corporate call that we unite ourselves with God's kingdom vision for justice. So that's just by way of intro. So we're going to pray together now. I do hope that's okay, and then we'll have a little reflection afterwards. So a lament for the climate and ecological emergency. Let's just spend a moment quieting ourselves. The prophet Habakkuk wrote these words: "Though the fig tree does not bud, and there are no grapes on the vines, though the olive crop fails, and the fields produce no food, though there are no sheep in the pen, and no cattle in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in God my Saviour." In the liturgy that follows, there's some words of bold which you might want to say out loud. Father of creation, God of compassion. You created a world of wonder, of possibility and potential. You declared it to be good. For this we give thanks. To you be praise, honor, and glory. For this we give thanks. To you be praise, honor, and glory. Father of creation, God of compassion, this world is no longer as you intended it to be. Humanity has betrayed its calling to tend and keep. Creation groans. For this we weep. Lord, have mercy. For this we mourn. Christ, have mercy. On our watch, we reap what we have sown. On our watch, sea levels rise. For this we weep. Lord, have mercy. For this we mourn. Christ, have mercy. On our watch, forests destroyed. On our watch, locusts swarm. For this we weep. Lord, have mercy. For this we mourn. Christ, have mercy. And so now, with tears in our eyes, we look to you. With regret, with repentance, knowing the difficult decades that we face. As temperatures rise, extinctions increase. As we come to terms with our own existential plight. For our children, Lord, have mercy. For our grandchildren, Christ, have mercy. For the world's most vulnerable, Christ, have mercy. Father of creation, God of compassion, wake us from our slumber. Equip us afresh to be the justice-shaped people of God. Father of creation, God of compassion, wake us from our slumber. Equip us afresh to our priestly and prophetic calling. That we would speak truth in a culture of denial. That we would enact hope in a culture of despair. That we would face what will be with love-filled action. That in humanity's darkest hour, you would enliven us so we would bandage the wounds of those caught beneath the wheels of climate injustice. That in humanity's darkest hour, we would have the courage to drive a spoke into the wheel of climate injustice itself. Father of creation, God of compassion, you created a world of wonder, of possibility and potential. You declared it to be good. In our grief, in our mourning, we give thanks. To you be praise, honor, and glory. Amen. For I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. Amen. Before we come out of that into perhaps some discussion, let's just have just a few moments of silence.